Hello. So good day from Germany. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for this kind invitation, dear Monica in particular. It's a great pleasure and honor to participate in this activity, and which I find very much important and I fully support. My topic of today actually is to present on the narcolepsy management treatment in the European Union and incorporating the patient voice. And I was a little bit so free to open up a little bit more this topic on the management of narcolepsy in general. So I may start. Please find here my disclosures. I was very much inspired by seeing this kind of pictures or movie. Actually, it was by Jerry Shum from the 1960s, who was an artist, but also a cameraman. And one of his activities was to go with a tractor to the beach and to do some kind of pluming of the soil and to give some kind of art fixed structures there. So when you see here the same structure looking from different angles with his camera, you see different figures. It can be a rectangle, it can be a trapezoid, or can be a quadrant. So changing the perspective, looking in a different way on the same aspect seems to be essential in the management of narcolepsy. And I always raise the question, what does really matter? And having said this, I would like to start with the definition of goals. What does it mean? When we speak about symptoms of narcolepsy, and the little we as physicians also learn about this, is that there are 5 symptoms: excessive daytime sleepiness, cataplexy, and the other ones often not even mentioned so much. And this is still where we where the management is often based upon. So, but when you look into publications and when you speak to patients, of course, you see that there are a lot of other aspects of other symptoms which are important. One of the works has been by the Harvard group, by Kieran Maskey, and I believe you're very well aware of this publication. When looking what are the symptoms you experience and what are most important ones, and you see difficulties in thinking, generally fatigue or something, never feel rested. In another publication also from the Netherlands, you see also here EDS, of course, is present in almost all persons, but also then lack of energy, difficulty concentrating, or difficulty in memories are most frequently mentioned. So I think we have to open up very much our view on the symptoms of narcolepsy. And of course, we have EDS, we have cataplexy, which are extremely important, but we also have concentration and memory deficits, depression, we have fatigue, and many others. This is not even completely written here. So we have to have a more holistic view on the symptoms of narcolepsy. Why is this also so important? One of my co-workers, Benedikte Finger, was studying therapy adherence and adherence barriers in narcolepsy. And one of the results we found here was that people with narcolepsy describing bad feelings on the other one hand, or to frequently forget things. So memory deficits and depressions are major aspects which have a which are major limitation of therapy adherence also in narcolepsy. Other aspects we identified were if patients are not very well informed about treatment options or medication intake, this has a major limitation in therapy adherence, which is reasonable. Also, other aspects, long sleep times, partial cataplexy, and poor quality of life were associated. So what really matters, and coming back again to the study from the Maskey group, performing household duties like cooking or socializing with friends are actually most important. And in our European guideline, you see this on the right hand, the patient representatives themselves described the aspects that were important to them from their point of view. So to say, focus more on practical issues and to help to manage daily life, or to individualize management, or to address non-pharmacological treatments more fully. So this is what we see in clinical practice and when we ask for feedback from people affected by narcolepsy. One of the difficulties here is that in clinical studies and clinical trials, very few of these aspects are also addressed. And even if they are addressed, we use, let's say, very limited methods to address them. We have questionnaires, diaries, we have a few testings like the MWT, but just looking at this, you see that a lot of other aspects of other symptoms are not addressed and are not very well addressed. And this, of course, also needs to change in the future. So as first step, we have to define better our goals in the management. We have to consider all symptoms or the symptoms which are relevant to the person affected by narcolepsy. We have to consider comorbidities. We also have to address aspects of work, of daily activities, and for family planning or other family aspects, individual needs, and we have to do a more patient-centered in these aspects and also in clinical trials. When coming to the management, the first part here is, I call it self-management, and really to have an empowerment and to increase and to maintain the most autonomy possible for the patients. What does it mean? I will try to explain this to you. In the first part, it is essential to apply appropriate information to a person who has been diagnosed or who has been affected by narcolepsy. So, and this is also why I immediately accepted this invitation, because I think this is an essential activity for everybody affected. And you have to apply information on the course of the treatment options, of prognosis, all the other aspects I have mentioned here. And you have to address this to the person and, to my experience, also to relatives, and even if necessary to other people who are involved in this person. You also have to apply additional sources of information, like on websites, self-help group, Wake Up Narcolepsy, provide own material, etc. To my understanding, giving this information only by giving first this information, and as a second part being to maintain a full transparency, then you can start to have a therapeutic decision and talk with the person affected, and then to decide on the therapy. Just to mention what does transparency means in this context, we have a method here which we call open notes. So all the documentation and all what we as physicians are having in the documentation is of course open also to the patient. So we don't have any secrets or something different. And we use also are open with our disclosures that the persons also know if there are some advisory boards or something where we are participating. So having this information and giving the transparency, I think then we can have an informed and shared therapeutic decision. Only if a person knows very well about the disease, he can decide on what he will accept as a therapy. And once this decision is taken, I think the chance to have a good adherence and compliance to therapy is much larger. Self-management and pharmacological therapies then are the next step when we talk about the management. And in this part, I will talk about the self-care aspects, and I will not go too much in detail here because I believe you're very well aware of this. Taking daytime naps is essential. Sometimes we have to discuss about the length and the timing of this nap, but overall daytime napping is usually extremely effective. A daily structure to maintain, and of course also avoidance of sleep deprivation is important. We have very good experience and also some data on the improvement of regular physical exercise on wakefulness and also on cataplexy. So this is a fixed recommendation also to patients. And also I prefer very much to consider cataplexy triggering situations than avoiding them, because one of our co-workers, Mareile Opwis, we just worked on cataplexy triggering situation, emotion regulation here, and we found that 2/3 of the patients really try to avoid cataplexy, and that this avoidance was associated with the development of depression and decreased physical function. So we do not have to talk about completely avoiding situations, but how to handle and how to handle these kind of situations. Further, of course, caffeine use and sedation medication has to be considered, and avoidance of heavy and late meals. And I may also add that we also recommend very much a low-carb diet, even a keto diet, so no carb can be very, very efficacious. Next, we will talk about behavioral interventions. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be helpful and useful for some patients, and of course also to participate in patient support group, also for parents or with the children, where you see here some picture before of the pandemic. I believe we will hear also today from the ENEP, the European Narcolepsy Alliance for Patients, so I will not go more into detail here. I'm aware that there are also some narcolepsy apps available in the US and in North America. So some years ago, we also started to develop such kind of app for better self-management of the patients, to support them here, but also to have some better kind of communication and exchange. What we also developed some years ago were some kind of specific rehabilitation program. So there are several possibilities. I know that, for example, in Italy, they're also preparing or working on an ambulatory rehabilitation program. We did this even as an in-house program for 4 weeks, where we have specified, we have self-help groups together, we had specified therapies from therapists who were really trained in this disorder. And I also learned a lot, for example, here from the music therapy people. And they started to develop their own concepts. And what you see here is a person laying on a tone couch, I think it's called. It's like a huge guitar, actually, because the person sitting down here, he's not praying, he's playing the guitar, which is below of this wooden part you can see here. So actually, this is the only activity I'm aware of where a person with narcolepsy could really relax, but not falling asleep. So people say, I hear the music, I feel the sound, and this makes me relax, and I can, however, stay awake. So self-management, for self-management, you need an appropriate information. We have to have a shared decision on this. And for me, and I think for many other colleagues here in Europe, non-pharmacological management is really the basis of the therapy and the first therapy which should be implemented. Actually, if possible, I try first to have 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to start only with non-pharmacological aspects and to see how much we can improve and that people can realize how much they can improve their symptoms by their own. And then to consider finally also if additional pharmacological treatment is needed. When talking about this pharmacological management, I will present you mainly on the European guidelines, which have been published last year. I also refer that there are guidelines from the US. Also, first author is here Kieran Muskie, but I will refer mainly on the European guidelines, which has been a joint activity of the European societies who are involved in this disorder. Don't worry, I'm not going too much into the methods and details here. I just wanted to explain you very shortly that this guideline has been developed by trying to answer questions. So at the beginning, we started to develop questions and decide on which questions are important to say, what is the clinical evidence for the efficacy of pharmacological treatment of EDS? And following this question, of course, looking into the literature and developing answers to these kind of questions. For some of the aspects we are addressing, not everything is possible in a randomized controlled trial. So this is a funny example that not everything can be performed in a randomized controlled trial, such as if paracute use is useful to prevent death or major trauma. This, of course, cannot be done in a randomized controlled trial. So this guideline, that we have developed guidelines, and parts of this guideline are also only expert opinion. These guidelines are separated into different sections. You can see here, disease-modifying therapies. I think this is extremely interesting. Non-pharmacological management, comorbidities and quality of life, pharmacotherapy in adults and children, where we also developed some clinical pathways. And we talk about special conditions. And I think this was one of the first guidelines who included this. We had a particular section on the patient's needs and view on the management of narcolepsy. I added also this guideline into your bag, so you can read all over this document later. So now to talk about the treatment opportunities we have in narcolepsy. We know that narcolepsy is based upon genetic, environmental, and immune factors, which cause orexin deficiency and some kind of dysregulation in the histamine system. And these changes are causal for the symptoms we realize in narcolepsy. So where is our current management? Currently, our management, pharmacomanagement, is purely symptomatic. And of course, we and a lot of researchers, which have been also mentioned before, are also trying to look if there are some kind of disease modifying or earlier interventions to treat this disease. Currently, we talk about symptomatic treatment. We looked into disease modifying treatments in our guideline, but the currently available data were extremely limited, and there were many case reports or small case series. Overall, we cannot recommend any of these interventions, in particular ones that are immunosuppressive, because currently no benefit has been shown, and they are also potentially very harmful medications. So currently, no recommendations for any disease-modifying treatment. For the non-pharmacological treatments, scheduled napping, as I have addressed before, is highly recommended. There are also studies indicating for this. The other aspects mentioned here, physical therapy, nutrition, cognitive therapy, are also helpful to our broad experience. However, the level of evidence was so low, no studies, or very few studies, that we could not give a formal recommendation to this. However, it is useful to my personal experience and the experience of many others. When coming to the pharmacological management, I would just point to very few aspects that maybe in the last years have been quite important. Of course, there are a lot of studies. I just wanted to mention the approval of sodium oxybate also for children from the age of 7 on. This was, I think, a very important aspect to improve the management also of children, because here we have very few approved medications, few studies. So I think it was very good to have other options. And so this is why I wanted to mention this point here. Another aspect is the data we have on pitolisant, which also have evolved now over the last years, where we have, let's say, more real-world data, and also addressing changes here on the improvement of MWT or cataplexy, also in patients who are severely affected. And we see improvement by pitolisant in real-world settings. So data from Dovier and colleagues, but we have similar data from our center, improving cataplexy or also hallucinations and paralysis, sleep paralysis. For you in the US, not so new, but for us in Europe, it's just 1 year. We have solriamfetol as treatment option. And of course, it has to be addressed that there were some studies indicating improvement on MWT, on the ESS score, and we started to collect also real world data here, also indicating that these effects stay over time. We tried to give an overview of our recommendations in the management, which I'm showing you here in the table. So we separated this on the different symptoms on EDS, so excessive daytime sleepiness, cataplexy, disturbed nocturnal sleep, and sleep-related paralysis and hallucinations. And you can see here the recommendations for or against. And I will not go through every individual compound here, but you can, I think you will have quite a nice overview. What I would like to address that we also have sometimes high recommendations for compounds where we only have clinical experience, because for venlafaxine or clomipramine, actually there are no trials available, but we as physicians have a very good experience all together, the panelists from the guideline. So following a recommendation also for the management of these compounds here. Similarly, but even more difficult and more complex, because we have less data, less studies for children. And then we also tried to develop some kind of pathways, some kind of algorithm where we looked into what is when a person is suffering mainly from sleepiness. So you see this on the left. What can be a first-line option? What can be second-line options? Or if you see more at the right, if it's suffering from EDS, cataplexy, and disturbed nocturnal sleep, what can be then as monotherapy or combination therapy, one of the first-line options. Similarly, for children, again, more difficult to recommend here. As I said, you find these kind of pathways and algorithms within the European guideline you have received. Some few aspects on future management. I believe you have heard and will hear a lot more about this during the Congress. I think the topic on orexin receptor agonists is extremely interesting, extremely promising. We have had several years ago here in Germany, we started a trial with orexin itself, the substance itself as treatment, but unfortunately it didn't work. So we were always looking forward to see the evolution of this and to see the orexin receptor agonist. I believe you're aware of some of the preliminary data here, and within these receptor agonists, there are different companies and different compounds which are currently under investigations. Not only the agonists, but also the antagonists to improvement of sleep. And we also have new and different compounds as the histamine system, histamine 3 or 4 receptor inverse agonists. And we also have mazindol also involved in the orexin system. To finalize my lecture, to comment lately on some other aspects. I may start. We gave in this guidelines also recommendations on particular situations, and aspects like pregnancy, family planning, breastfeeding, contraception are unfortunately very poorly investigated. But these are extremely important for daily life. So we try to give some help here, some recommendations also for elderly patients with narcolepsy or refractory to treatment and some other aspects. And then, as I have addressed before, we included into the development of the guideline patient representatives that have been participating in the European Narcolepsy Days we are having every year. And the patients together wrote a section, and overall they required an increasement of awareness and understanding, also from the physicians. They suggested some specialized health workers, which maybe in the US it's more common, but in Europe we don't have any specialized health workers in narcolepsy yet. We have to address much more patient-related outcome measures, also in research, and to address much more non-pharmacological management aspects. To close, I would like to summarize a little bit. I hope you could understand a little bit my suggestion to change of perspective and to include this, to understand and to look into the symptomatology of narcolepsy, to consider much more individual symptoms, comorbidities, patients' needs, and to start with self-care and behavioral strategies, which are extremely helpful and are safe. And to understand that we have an extensive pharmacotherapy options available, which we can use much more individualized, and I'm sure to have much more options even in the future, giving this to a concept of towards an individualized therapy of patients. And by having said this, I would like to thank you for your attention. This is my team, our team from the Center Narcolepsy, and you can see that we have MDs, PhDs, and also psychologists here in our team. And having said this, I would like to thank you again, and I'm looking forward to your questions.